why was crucifixion so bad?
Closest thing they had in that movie was when the Roman guard, after they beat him on his back.
It's actually too much for the movie.
While nerve pain is shooting in his arms.
Most of us cannot even imagine. Was the reality of the crucifixion even more horrifying than we think? Hi, I'm Father David Michael Moses. I'm a Catholic priest, and please consider subscribing if you find these reaction videos helpful. So there's a clip going around the internet right now of a guy talking about just how horrible the crucifixion actually was and how it's a lot worse than we probably have seen in even a lot of movies. So let's take a look and see what he has to say.
Jesus would have loved to be treated the way they treated him on Passion of the Christ.
So if you don't know, The Passion of the Christ was the very popular film about the crucifixion of Jesus. And it's actually known for being very, very graphic.
He would have loved to be beat that way. It was such a cute depiction of what really happened. He would have ate that if it was just what we saw in that movie. And that was the best depiction we ever seen of Jesus's crucifixion. The crucifixions were worse than that.
So yeah, I think one initial thought, people don't realize how brutal the pre-modern ancient world was. At the time of Christ, to see violence in the streets, in the world, wouldn't have been out of the ordinary at all. Children were not seen as valued at all. If you didn't want your baby, people just threw the baby out to die on its own. Women were treated horribly. People don't realize Christianity redeemed that society so much. So much of the modern sensitivities we have are because of the teachings of Jesus. At the time when he was living, it was a completely different story.
His intestines were hanging out. His entire rib cage was showing on both sides. His beard chunks were pulled out. His spine was opened up and exposed. The tissues and the muscles around his spine were exposed. He was beat butt naked.
So it's worth saying, why were the Romans doing it? Why was crucifixion so bad? They had this idea during the Roman Empire of the Pax Romana, which translates to the Roman peace. It was the way the Romans kept things in order and they kept power. It wasn't peace in the sense that everybody got along really well, everybody loved each other. It was peace in the sense that they stayed in control, that you did what they said. And one of the ways they retained that level of power is that if anyone threatened them, if anybody was leading a rebellion, anyone claimed to be some kind of king, anyone was causing a disturbance for them, they publicly tortured and killed that person. And it was kind of less about punishing that person because they were going to die in the end of it anyways. It was more about sending the signal, don't be like this person. Don't follow in their footsteps. Don't say you know them. You know, people rag on Peter for denying Jesus 3 times, but this is what Peter knew was coming. He knew that's where this was headed for Jesus, and he was terrified of having to go through that himself. The irony, of course, is Peter eventually was crucified willingly, but at the moment he was so afraid of this. So the Romans were professionals; they knew what they were doing, and they made it as gruesome as possible.
The closest thing they had in that movie was how when they beat him with the cat of nine tail whips with the hooks, and they were ripping chunks out of him. Closest thing they had in that movie was when the Roman guard, after they beat him on his back, the Roman guard turned him over, went like that.
Yeah, it's kind of wild in that movie after the scourging, which is kind of known to be the most graphic scene, and you really do see like flesh from the body of Christ just ripped out. His back is just completely flogged, and then the Roman soldier, as he says, motions his hand to like flip him over and then beat him. But they don't actually show that in the movie. They cut to the next scene. It's actually too much for the movie, and he's saying that's just the tip of the iceberg.
They beat him in the front. That's how they did him. All of this was ripped open, all in shreds. He had to carry a 200-pound, 300-pound cross, like how we squat in the gym. He had to carry that for some miles up a hill with his body open, all his blood gone, completely no energy, and he carries it for a long way. Shows you how strong Jesus was.
Yeah, people forget Jesus was a carpenter. He was a strong man. He was masculine. The fact that he was able to even make it this far without passing out in the crucifixion says a lot about how strong he was in his humanity.
The nails are like railroad picks. It pierces through the nerves in his hands, and I don't know if you ever pinched a nerve, but all the nerves in his hands are pierced through. Nerve here, nerves here, and nerves in both his feet. So he has shocking nerve pain in both arms. But while he's on the cross, he's suffocating. This is all in the medical examination of what happened to him.
And maybe the craziest part of this is that Jesus doesn't have to be doing it. Other people in this time were getting crucified. Jesus has two men crucified with him, maybe not as brutally as he is, but other people were crucified. But those people couldn't stop it. They were powerless in the hands of the Romans. Jesus, at any point, he was having to keep himself there. Kind of makes you think, like, if you take it like a cold shower or something like that. To stand in the cold water is really hard because you want to step out of it. For Jesus, he was the one having to put himself in it, and he had to keep himself in it because it would have been so easy in his divinity to release himself from that, to even release himself from his body, to get out of that situation. But instead, he chooses to stay there.
He's suffocating. So he has to lean up to breathe, but he's on a rugged, splintery cross and his spine is open. So he's rubbing splintery wood on his open tissues and muscles. For 6 hours, he's doing this to breathe and rubbing, while nerve pain is shooting in his arms and shooting in his feet. Every second of his life, every breath is the most excruciating pain he could ever take. And he doesn't say anything.
Yeah, most of us cannot even imagine going through that. Or you think about like Mary having to sit there and watch her son go through that. It's horrific. And he mentions that Jesus doesn't say anything. Jesus isn't crying out in pain. He's not complaining. In fact, what does Jesus say? He says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." In the middle of being tortured horribly, he's thinking about forgiveness for others, which is a great model to all of us. Just a reflection. I mean, some people say, gosh, Jesus suffered so much. Why did he have to do that for me? And I would just say ultimately, like, if you're in a relationship with somebody, let's say you're married, and your spouse only does things that are convenient for them. Like, they do stuff with you, they do things for you, but it's only stuff that they really want to do. And there's never a moment when they have to submit their own will to something that you're asking of them. If their love for you is always convenient, then you'll never actually know if they really love you. It's not till that there's some sacrifice, some suffering they have to go through, that you're actually going to know how they feel about you. And the same way with Jesus, like we never have to wonder how he feels about us. We never have to wonder how much he values us, because he's really shown that on the cross in the most gruesome way you could possibly imagine. Love is always shown through sacrifice. And finally, I mentioned earlier how the point of this for the Romans was so that people watching knew not to follow this guy. Don't be like this guy. Don't say you're friends with this guy. And what does the word Christian mean? It means little Christ. For us to be Christians is to say, I follow him. I follow him. I know him. He's my friend. He's my God. And I will go wherever he goes. It's a beautiful response to the threat of the world and the threats of the enemy and the fear, to say, no, I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Christ. So thanks be to God that he sent his son to suffer for us, to suffer with us, and to bring us new life. And hopefully all this kind of helps us to grow in our appreciation of what Jesus did for us. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time. God bless.